Bula Vinaka and welcome to this episode of Talk Business. Tonight we will be talking to the financial inclusion team from the United Nations Capital Development Fund based in Suva on how UNCDF has made a considerable progress in Fiji and the Pacific in ensuring there is financial inclusion and that more people have access to financial services, how they have built excellent relationship with governments across the region and the positive feedbacks and response they have received on initiatives that have been set in motion. All that and more are coming up in the next half hour.
UNCDF stands for United Nations Capital Development Fund, and the program we have ongoing in Fiji and 4 other islands, Pacific islands, is called the Pacific Digital Economy Program. The mandate of the program is to build inclusive digital economies in the Pacific. I would say that the mandate is quite broad. So if you were to ask me, where do we sort of specialize in and what is our strength, I would say our strength lies in the intersection of digital finance and digital economy. It's a very niche space that we like to operate in. And as I said, the program is in 5 countries. The program started in April of 2021. It takes over from the previous erstwhile program that we ran called the Pacific Financial Inclusion Program, which ran successfully for about 12 years in the Pacific, spanning all these 5 countries. The program is a regional program, and it has taken off at the same time. We started in Fiji. It has taken off in the remaining islands as well. The beneficiaries of the program are largely Pacific Islanders, MSMEs, which are micro, small, medium enterprises. A lot of our program interventions are targeted at vulnerable communities, especially youth, women, and we do a lot of work around migrants and seasonal workers. We understand the importance of seasonal workers for the region, and we do a lot of work around how digital finance can really make their life easy. We have multiple partners which spans across the government, private sector. I would say if you were to ask me who are some of our most important partners, I would say these are the governments of each of these Pacific Island countries. And within the government machinery, I would say the respective central banks in these countries are an important partner for us. In some cases, we work closely with respective ministries of finance, and in the case of Fiji, we work very closely with the Ministry of Economy, and because the program has a strong digital mandate, we liaise closely with the Digital Fiji in the country. So I would say these are our important partners as far as the government is concerned, and no part of the puzzle is complete without the private sector, and they have a very important role in development. So we work closely with commercial banks in the region. We work closely with mobile network operators like Vodafone and Digicel. We work with insurance companies in the region. And last but not the least, and certainly most importantly, all of this is possible only with the support of donor governments, which in our case is Australia. And they've been very supportive of some of our initiatives around furthering access to finance, building robust digital finance ecosystems. So this would not have been possible without the support of governments like Australia. It's been an eventful journey, I would say. It's not all been hits. We've had some misses as well, but I think that's part of growing as a program. We've matured quite significantly over the period of 12 years. We had humble beginnings in the form of the Pacific Financial Inclusion Program. The mandate of that program was to further financial inclusion. Financial inclusion in layman terms means how do we ensure everyone in Fiji and in the respective Pacific Island countries have access to, simply put, a bank account. So the mandate of the Pacific Financial Inclusion Program was to ensure more and more people have access to financial services, and the most basic of it being a bank account. So our journey started off back then in 2028 or 29. And ever since, we've made significant progress in the number of people who've been able to access some form of formal financial services. And if you look at the region in general, it is plagued by a certain infrastructural problems related, or I wouldn't say problems so much. I would say barriers related to financial literacy, digital literacy. So these are some of the issues that our program sort of went about to address, and I would say we've made considerable progress in the last 12 years in some of these aspects. In general, I think we've received very good feedback on some of the initiatives that we've set in motion. We have an excellent relationship with the government, and we've been able to do some very foundational work in these countries as far as setting up a national financial inclusion strategy is concerned. For any plan to be implemented, there has to be a strategy put in place which has the buy-in of the host government, right? So in our case, let's say if we were to work with the respective central banks, we worked with the likes of Reserve Bank of Fiji, Reserve Bank of Vanuatu, the National Reserve Bank of Tonga, Central Bank of Solomon Islands, to set up these foundational guiding documents which define the various means and ways and steps that needs to be taken to ensure more and more people have access to formal financial services. So the government has been extremely, Pacific Island governments have been extremely receptive of our contribution to enable access to finance through these financial inclusion strategies. In the private sector, it's been I would say it's been a challenging journey because the Pacific Island countries are a reasonably challenging environment to operate in for a commercial business. So some of our initiatives, around mobile money, for example, mobile money, the PFIP or our erstwhile program supported Vodafone to roll out, the M-Pesa in Fiji. So, some of these initiatives, we've been able to take this mobile money from Fiji to the likes of Vanuatu. Now, would a private business do this on their own without support, both financial support and technical sort of support from development agencies like us? The question is, would private sector organizations venture out into rolling out these kind of services if it weren't for donor governments like Australia or agencies like us who would support or push the private sector to enable them to sort of get out in the market? Because I mean, in all honesty, these are relatively small markets where margins are low for profit margins are low for organizations, for private sector. We are talking about archipelagos where there's territorial dispersions, in general low literacy rates. So internet infrastructure. Fiji is doing phenomenally well in terms of internet infrastructure, but some of these countries, the internet cost is very high, right? So if you were to go to Solomon Islands or Vanuatu, 1 gigabyte of internet would cost you a few dollars, US dollars. So on the surface this might not look like a big problem, but these kind of high costs are a deterrence to private businesses and consumers to undertake certain activities. So where I'm getting at is really, the private sector has been extremely responsive to our call for action to introduce these kinds of services, and in general, I think we've been able to cover some ground as far as private sector, public sector, and donor governments are concerned. I think it is. I would say it is critical. because that's a classic example I gave you. There are some cases, for example, in some countries, in some Pacific Island countries, there is no internet connectivity. Yeah. And in some cases where the islands are a good distance away, people would, like, let's take for example obtaining a police clearance certificate. We are all familiar. Some of the businesses, they've applied for a police clearance certificate, and most seasonal workers apply for a police clearance certificate when they travel to Australia or New Zealand. Now, take for example, Fiji or Vanuatu, right? Now, if someone in the outer islands has to apply for a police clearance certificate, they need to travel from an outer island to the main police station, which is there most probably in the center of the town. Now that costs a significant amount, right? And we've actually done a feasibility study to understand just how much it costs for someone to travel all the way from an outer island to come to the police station, apply for a police clearance certificate, wait for 7 days, spend that money on a hotel or food and transport. Now, we are working to digitize such things. It's fairly simple. Is there a possibility where a customer who wants to apply for a police clearance certificate, can he log in on his mobile phone, open an app, and upload his ID document, and more importantly, make a payment? He has to pay for the police clearance certificate, right? So can we bring in the likes of M-Pesa or a Digicel MyCash to embed that payment platform onto the app, where the customer can upload his ID document, pay through M-Pesa, and then it goes to the police, and then the police sort of runs a background check, and then the police clearance certificate gets delivered to his email ID. In principle, it sounds very simple, right? But there are a lot of steps that needs to be taken for this to happen. So I would say such kind of services are critical for a consumer, and it is absolutely important for the government as well to make services more easily accessible, efficient, and cheap for their citizens. So I would say our work is quite critical on ground. The Pacific Digital Economy Program, as the name suggests, looks to build inclusive digital economies. When I say inclusive, it means that we don't want to leave anyone behind. Now, COVID-19 has made all our lives miserable, and it's highlighted the importance of having access to digital platforms, having access to means of making online transactions. So the objective of the program, I would say, very timely given the current context. The objective is to really enable the citizens of Pacific Island countries, and in this case Fiji, to ensure more and more people are able to access services online, are able to make payments online, are able to access government services, and so there are different aspects to this where we address financial literacy, digital literacy being one of them, innovation, digital innovation, financial innovation being one of them, and all of this is only possible if we can have a robust regulatory and policy environment which sort of enables all of these functions to take place. And for that, we work with the government. So we work with the government, the private sector, the donor governments. We bring them all together as a UN agency to make things move on ground. So the e-commerce is a very important part of our portfolio. There are two reasons to this. One is because the Pacific Digital Economy Program in itself is a joint program between 3 UN agencies, one of which is United Nations Development Program, which is UNDP, and the other is, it's called UNCTAD, which is United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, whose core mandate is to enable trade. So this program was conceived to bring in different elements of, different strengths of UN agencies to combine into this one program. So the e-commerce work that we do is very relevant to the current context, given how much COVID-19 is sort of affected all of us. And if there's COVID-19 has affected every sector, but it's affected businesses very badly. So the business sector, not just in Fiji but around the world. So in the current context, what's happened is all the businesses where there was face-to-face trade has been stopped due to lockdowns, restrictions on movements, and curfews, right? So it affects small-time vendors, day-to-day laborers, day-to-day workers. So why this e-commerce project came about is, we sat together, the three agencies sat together and asked ourselves, like, what can we do to enable, businesses, especially MSMEs, within the MSMEs, the micro segment, which makes up for a big chunk of MSMEs, but the ones that suffer the most, right? So when we put our heads together on how to make their life better, one of the obvious solutions was to bring them online, right? So now, what we need to understand is that the micro sector is typically a difficult sector to work in terms of literacy levels, in terms of accessibility, in terms of affordability, in terms of a lot of aspects, right? So this e-commerce project came about from this thought, right? So the idea behind some of our e-commerce projects, and I'm happy to speak to you about it in detail, but in principle, our idea was to take face-to-face trade and move them online. Right? So if you look at some of the projects that we're supporting in Fiji, we're supporting two projects. One is Solve Fiji. They're on a platform called Markete, and the other is Cyber Foods. It's basically an online food delivery platform. So the idea behind supporting such institutions or such businesses is so that they can support, the micro vendors, the small scale, businesses, to take their business and sort of migrate them to online platforms. Now think about it. If you were to be a micro business yourself, do you have the capacity to build your own website, to embed a payment system, to arrange, most importantly, for delivery? Logistics is a big part of e-commerce, which takes money, right? So now if you want to sell something, who's going to deliver it, right? So it is practically impossible for a small business to be able to look into all these aspects of e-commerce. So when we thought further, we thought, okay, so should we support an aggregator? Now, who's an aggregator? An aggregator is any platform who can bring such small businesses together and host them all together in one single platform, right? So Solve Fiji and Cyber Foods do precisely that. So they take different vendors and they bring them online and sort of, get the whole they build the ecosystem and they just onboard the vendors. So that is the idea behind these e-commerce projects. Solve Fiji should look to onboard a good number of micro. I think we're working with them to put up a substantial number of vendors on their website. I think, if I'm not wrong, the numbers stand in 3 digits, up to 1,000 vendors. The idea is for them to be, is for them to be online so that they can trade online, right? So that's just the background to why we came up, and we're supporting these businesses by subsidizing some of their costs, which is again high for businesses, right? So subsidize their cost, give them advice on how to run the business, because within the program, the UN agency, which is the UNCTAD UN agencies, they specialize in this. So we want to draw on their expertise and help local businesses in Fiji.
The United Nations Capital Development Fund has in the past 10 years provided capital and technical support to thousands in the Pacific through inclusive digital economy programs, all aimed at ensuring that more households and small businesses gain access to services that expand opportunities and reduce vulnerabilities.
I mean, it's not just a problem with Fiji. The region is very vulnerable to disasters, natural disasters. If you look at the world's most at-risk country, the list, Vanuatu ranks number 1. And then comes, I think, Tonga, if I'm not mistaken. So, and the last I checked, there were about 4 to 5 Pacific Island countries in top 10. So it just goes to show that the region is absolutely vulnerable to climate disasters. And a program like the Pacific Insurance and Climate Adaptation Program, it works to ensure that every islander has access to climate insurance. The other program that we have ongoing right now is on blue economy, green economy, and coral reef. That's another interesting program as well, which has great benefits to Fijians. It is challenging, and that goes back to literacy and goes back to the general levels of literacy. Again, it's a region-wide barrier that we're working on tackling. We do it in different ways. We conduct workshops where we sort of explain the basics of literacy, the basics of financial services, the basics of digital literacy. The other way we do it is through an institution. For example, a bank. Right now, banks have access to so many people who come to them who want to open an account. Right, so we support the bank, who in turn can sort of impart different curriculums on digital literacy and financial literacies. In some cases, in some countries, we work directly with the Ministry of Education. We work directly with the qualifications authorities, and then we tie it back to the National Financial Inclusion Strategy, where one of the most important criteria that the government will look to achieve is to up literacy levels in these countries. But yes, I fully agree with you. It's not easy educating the common man. It's a long game. It's a long haul game, and agencies like the UN are in it for a long period of time. So it's for us to ensure sustainable change. Well, it's certainly going to be more digital. You're not running away from that, and all that COVID-19 has done is really accelerate adoption of digital services. So that is going to stay. Contrary to what people say, people will still stick even more closely to the mobile phone. Usage of mobile phones will go up, at least it's poised to go up. Hopefully better connectivity, cheaper internet rates, more services accessible online, and the world of financial services will probably move, more digital. So there'll probably not be more bank branches, but there'll be more apps, which the bank. You may not find a bank more easily, but the bank is coming closer to you in the form of an app. So these are some of the changes, some of the trends that we already see, happening. So I think that's the outlook for the next decade or so. I think one of the ways that we ensure our work reaches the right audience is through effective communications, engagement of critical stakeholders like yourselves, the media, different modes of communication. In some cases we get creative. We use graphics and pictures and cartoons and to educate people. But I mean, it's great. I mean, there's in general we're seeing an upward trend. So I mean, just look at the world around us, and then we can come down to the Pacific. In general, there is increased usage of smartphones, right? More and more people are able to access, now have phones in their hands. Internet is the general cost of internet is on a decline. There's better infrastructure. The Pacific is no exception. The Pacific is getting good infrastructure thanks to some support from the governments and the Fiji government. So and people are getting more and more tech savvy. Now everyone's on Facebook. YouTube, you know. So I think in general the outlook is very positive, and also the other important point is demographics. Right? So the Pacific region has got a significant young population. This is absolutely critical to enable and to drive the economy. So I think whilst there are challenges, the outlook, I would say I'm cautiously optimistic for the Pacific region, and I think in the next decade we'll see significant changes as far as all these aspects are concerned.
And that was Talk Business this evening. For questions and comments, please feel free to email us on newsroom@fijitv.com.fj. Until next Tuesday, have a productive week. Nemathemanda.